It wasn't long ago I reviewed the XS220 frame, and here it is. It's kind of a stretched X frame instead of a true X frame, which puts the front motors forward a little bit further and the back ones back a little bit more. Now, one thing that's a real big difference between this one and the X210 are these spacers here. They're a little bit taller than the X210, which gives you a little bit more height, which gives you a little bit more ability to adjust your camera. Well, I'm building this one out with the RS2206 motors, and they're 2750 kV, and I'm planning on using 2-blade props, so hopefully it'll be stupid fast. Anyway, today we're looking at this XS220E. Well, the E means that it's, I guess, enhanced or something, but the frame is pretty much the same. The main plate, this is a 4mm main plate, and it comes with the same battery strap, spacers. It comes with a set of screws that I'm not really sure what these are for, but it comes with the 4 screws to hold down the pod, which is different, and little feet here, power distribution board, and a battery protector. Well, the biggest difference here is this pod, and this pod is real ACC's reply to one that GetFPV made. And this one, it's a little thin. If you look here, you can see mine even arrived pre-broken, or maybe it's pre-stretched. I'm not sure which one. But this thing is not, I'm gonna put my finger here to hold this straight. It's kind of flexible, but it comes with 4 holes down here in the bottom. They don't have any metal pieces in it, so you just thread basically straight into the plastic, and it cuts its own thread. There's a little bit of clay in there. That's because of me. That didn't come in there. This power distribution board is a little bit different than the other one. It doesn't have the XT60 piece hanging off the side, and so this one you're going to have to put an extension on it and then hook up your own XT60 to your extension. So back to this pod. This pod's not too bad of a look. It, has a nice smooth curve here, and I think it would have enough room to put stuff inside. But this was really modeled after the pod from GetFPV, which I also have right here. And this pod has some big differences between these two. This one has the little metal spacers inside there for the screws to thread into, so you can take this off and replace it as many times as you want, and you're not really going to wear out any plastic, screw cut threads. Also, if you look on the inside, they got the same holes cut in here. I can hold these a little better. Got the same holes cut in inside, and I think that's designed for the TBS HV race video transmitters, and they want you to start using that because you can change the channels from your Taranis or from an OSD through Betaflight. If you look at these here, you can tell the one from GetFPV is a little bit taller. It's a little bit more leaning forward in the front. It also comes with the antenna mounts up on the top. And just for if you look here closely, you can see the widths of the wall, and you can see the GetFPV one is substantially thicker. And if I just take them and I kind of squeeze them a little bit, if I squeeze this one here, it squeezes pretty easily. This one here squeezes a little bit, but it's a lot more rigid. And this is one of my several of my friends have been flying with, and they've had real good luck with this one. So I was kind of hoping that this one would come out and be, somewhat close to this. Well, it kind of turns out there's really no competition, because this one is just a lot stronger and a lot more durable. And if you have any problems with this, if it comes broken like this one did, you can call GetFPV and they will ship you another one and not hardly give you any trouble at all. So this one here, it's okay. I wish they would have packed it a little better and not broken this in the mail, but also I think a little bit thicker walls would have substantially helped this pod. So here are some of the pieces in place, and on this power distribution board, the reason it didn't give you that XT60 connector hanging off the side is because it's not cut out for that. So instead they want you to use these 2 middle pads here, marked BAT, and have the XT60 connector hang off the back. And this thing is cut out in the shape of an XT60 connector. So when it sits in here, you can have it sit back there in the back. And the only problem you're probably going to run into is how to mount it. But they give you these 2 little holes back here to zip tie it down. Now another reason they didn't give you that XT60 hang out the side is because this thing hugs right up next to the power distribution board. It is on there. I mean, it doesn't move back and forth at all. So you can't have anything hanging off the sides of this. Now the downside well, not really downside, but another thing is they don't have any holes in here for your XT60 or for your USB connection. So you have to cut those out yourself as well. And one of my friends said a hot soldering iron will cut through this stuff, or even the one from GetFPV just fine, and then you can have access to it. So they probably didn't do it on purpose, just to give you the ability to put it where you needed it. So the pod's all screwed down now with the 4 screws, and it feels real solid now since it's attached to the frame. The screws threaded into the plastic just fine. There wasn't much, you know, restriction or anything. The one thing I would expect is that this frame would have actually fit onto the carbon fiber instead of hanging off the back of this, since it's their frame and their pod, you know, but oh well, picky points. Now overall I think this pod looks a heck of a lot cooler than the just the top plate being on top, because it gives you that real finished off look. Instead of seeing all these wires hanging out, it gives you a real finished look, and it doesn't look like it adds a lot of weight. We'll do a little weight measurement here in just a second. But I think that this thing is actually a lot stronger now that it's screwed down. It does still have a lot of bend up here in the top, so if you hit something, you got a good chance of bending this down, and I wish it was a little bit more sturdy and just a little bit thicker walls through the whole thing. We'll get some measurements off this frame here. Like I said before, this is the 4mm version, and these arms are about 15 millimeters wide. That's a little bit more narrow than the X210, but I think it's just because they had to turn the arms forward a little bit, and if these arms were a little bit longer, they'd probably reach down closer to the middle of this frame down here, and it would start interfering with the battery strap. So I think they just made them a little bit thinner for that reason. I'm sure there's going to be some people ask, now can I just buy the main plate from Banggood and then use GetFPV's pod? Well, you can, except for the holes don't line up exactly right. So they're a little bit wider than these are a little bit wider than what comes on the XS220. But if you're not scared of doing a little bit of drilling on your frame to open the holes up a little bit more, yeah, you could do that. The better thing to do is support the guys who made the original one, if that's really your intent. Buy this and buy the original one from them. But anyway, for sport people, this it would be an option to buy the main plate and buy the pod from somewhere else. The original XS220 frame with the top plate and the spacers was about 98.8 grams with the power distribution board. This one has the power distribution board inside there, so we'll go against that. So if I get this to balance on here, there we go. Right at 90 grams. So immediately you can tell this pod is taking away, you know, 10 grams, well, really 8 grams of weight away from the frame. Now, that doesn't sound like a big deal, but when you're trying to get as fast as you can, you want to get rid of every gram that you can. Now, if you're really concerned about grams, you should have got a 3mm plate instead of a 4mm. But if you're like me, I'd rather be flying rather than repairing all the time, which is the reason I went with the 4mm plate. If we measure the distance from the arm to arm, it comes up to be about, what, 223 or so? So calling this a 220 is a good name. I'm glad they didn't call it a 210 and then it measures out over 220. This frame also came with some landing gear pads. I'm not really sure what the point of those are, especially when your battery's hanging down below those pads. But I guess it's just to help if it comes down and maybe crashes, and maybe those will help give it a little bit extra padding. But overall, this is a pretty cool frame. If you're looking at the XS220 or the XS220E with this pod, it's just a toss-up of which one you think is cooler. I think the pod could be a little bit better built, but like I said, once it was screwed down to the frame itself, it seemed like it was going to be pretty solid. Even in rolls, it should be pretty fine too. You're going to be kind of tight inside with the build because your power distribution board is running real close up to your camera. But, you know, hopefully you can get an all-in-one power distribution board and flight controller, and that would save you a lot of space inside, and you'd easily be able to put your video transmitter and your receiver inside there. This one also doesn't have the antenna holders. It has 2 holes up here on the top. But recently, on my recent builds, I've been running the receiver antennas down along the inside of these arms. The nice thing about that is, since I've started doing that, I haven't ripped one off yet. When they were coming out the top, it would go into a roll and they'd get ripped off, and then you're kind of stuck the rest of the day. Anyway, the XS220 from Banggood, I'll have some links to this down in the description. If you're interested in the XS220 review, I'll put a link to that down there too. Anyway, if you have any questions, leave them down there. I'll try to answer them best I can, and as always, thanks for watching. Okay, you ready, Skyler? Yep. Will, you ready? I'm ready. Don't plug any transmitters in. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.